Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving headfirst into the murky waters of history, specifically, the often turbulent relationship between conquering regimes and the people they ruled. Welcome to our deep dive into history, where we compare how different regimes treated the citizens of the lands they invaded, occupied, or governed. Now, we're not talking about your standard textbook heroes and villains here. No, today we're getting granular, focusing on the nuances, the complexities, the good, the bad, and the downright ugly aspects of three very different empires: the Ottomans, the Crusaders, and more recently, the Israeli regime. Today we'll focus on the Ottomans, the Crusades, and the Israeli regimes, highlighting the honest aspects of these various regimes. So buckle up, grab your thinking caps, and maybe a cup of tea. This is going to be a long and hopefully illuminating ride. Alright, let's kick things off with a concept that's often been more aspirational than actual freedom of religion. When it comes to the Ottomans, we see a fascinating mix of pragmatism and, dare I say, a surprising degree of tolerance. While Islam was the dominant faith, the Ottomans, for the most part, allowed conquered people to maintain their religious practices, albeit with some restrictions and often in exchange for taxes. This millet system, as it was known, allowed various religious communities to govern their own affairs under Ottoman oversight. Now, the Crusades, on the other hand, well, that's a different story. Motivated by religious zeal, the Crusaders were, shall we say, less than tolerant of other faiths. Their primary goal was to wrest control of the Holy Land from Muslim rule, and religious conversion, often by force, was a key part of their strategy. And as for the Israeli regime, the situation is, as always, complicated, with claims of religious freedom existing alongside tensions with Palestinian Muslims and Christians. Respect for existing cultures is often a good indicator of a regime's long-term success, or lack thereof. The Ottomans, with their vast, multi-ethnic empire, understood this well. They often adopted a surprisingly hands-off approach when it came to local customs and traditions, allowing conquered people to maintain their languages, dress, and social structures so long as they didn't directly challenge Ottoman rule. The Crusaders, with their comparatively shorter-lived presence in the Holy Land, were less concerned with cultural integration. Their focus remained on establishing Christian control, often leading to the imposition of European customs and practices on the existing population. The Israeli regime, in its modern context, faces the complex task of balancing its own cultural identity with that of the Palestinian population, a situation fraught with challenges and, sadly, often marked by conflict. Nobody likes being micromanaged, right? Well, conquered populations are no different. The Ottomans, with their knack for pragmatic rule, often allowed for a degree of local autonomy. Local leaders, often from the existing power structures, were allowed to maintain some control over their regions, acting as intermediaries between the Ottoman administration and the populace. The Crusaders, with their more direct style of rule, were less inclined to share power. They established feudal systems with European nobles placed in positions of authority, often sidelining existing power structures. This approach, while effective in the short term, often led to resentment and resistance among the local population. The Israeli regime, in its dealings with the Palestinian territories, has grappled with the issue of self-governance, with varying degrees of autonomy granted and revoked over the years. Let's talk economics, folks. Because, let's face it, how a regime treats the livelihoods of its subjects says a lot. The Ottomans, for all their faults, understood the importance of a functioning economy. They generally protected private property, encouraged trade, and invested in infrastructure, albeit often with an eye towards maximizing tax revenue. The Crusaders, on the other hand, had a more complicated relationship with the economies they encountered. While some Crusader states fostered trade and economic growth, others were more focused on extracting resources to support their military campaigns, leading to exploitation and resentment. The Israeli regime's economic relationship with the Palestinian territories is a topic of much debate, with accusations of restrictions and exploitation on one side, and claims of investment and development on the other. This is a tough one, guys, but we can't shy away from the hard questions. The Ottomans, while relatively tolerant in matters of faith, weren't exactly pacifists. They engaged in their fair share of warfare and conquest, and while they didn't actively seek to eliminate those with different beliefs, Their actions sometimes resulted in significant loss of life. The Crusades, fueled by religious fervor, were particularly brutal in their treatment of those they deemed enemies of the faith. Massacres and forced conversions were tragically common, leaving a dark stain on this period of history. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, while not solely defined by religion, has unfortunately seen its share of violence and bloodshed on both sides. Imagine, if you will, being a merchant in a land conquered by a foreign power. Would you be allowed to continue your trade, or would you be forced out of business? Under Ottoman rule, the answer was often the former. The Ottomans, recognizing the importance of commerce, generally allowed local businesses to operate, albeit with the expectation of paying taxes. The Crusaders, with their focus on establishing Christian control, sometimes viewed local businesses with suspicion, particularly those owned by non-Christians. This could lead to discrimination, confiscation of property, or forced conversion. The Israeli regime's policies towards Palestinian businesses have been a point of contention, with accusations of restrictions and barriers to growth. Alright folks, this is where things get really dark. We're talking about acts of horrific violence and brutality that are difficult to even comprehend. The Ottomans, while not without their faults, didn't engage in systematic rape or ethnic cleansing as a matter of policy. That said, there were instances of violence and brutality committed by Ottoman soldiers, as is sadly the case in any war-torn era. The Crusades, on the other hand, were marked by shocking acts of cruelty. Massacres of civilians, including women and children, were tragically common, as were instances of rape and sexual violence. The use of such tactics was often justified by religious rhetoric, painting a chilling picture of the dark side of religious extremism. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has also seen its share of violence, with accusations of human rights abuses and disproportionate force levied against both sides. The Israeli forces have been accused of committing atrocities, including the demolition of Palestinian homes, leading to the displacement of countless families and the suffering of innocent civilians. The expansion of Israeli settlements has been a source of ongoing tension, often involving the seizure of Palestinian land. Discrimination and daily hardships faced by Palestinians at checkpoints and under occupation paint a grim picture of the reality on the ground. International condemnation and reports from human rights organizations highlight the severity of these issues, revealing a landscape marred by open hatred and deeply divided communities. Imagine being ruled by a power that doesn't represent your interests or values. Frustrating, right? That's why political participation, even in a limited form, can be so crucial. The Ottomans, with their decentralized administrative structure, sometimes allowed local elites to participate in government, albeit within the confines of Ottoman law. This provided a limited avenue for local voices to be heard. The Crusaders, with their feudal system, were less inclined to involve the local population in governance. Power rested firmly in the hands of European nobles, leaving little room for local input. The Israeli regime's approach to Palestinian political participation has evolved over time, with periods of greater autonomy followed by crackdowns and restrictions. However, this has often been overshadowed by severe atrocities, including the demolition of homes, theft of land, and systemic discrimination. The death toll has been significant, with countless lives lost and families torn apart. Open hatred and violence have marked the relationship, making genuine political participation a distant dream for many Palestinians. Alright, let's talk money, shall we? Because when it comes to empires, the bottom line often tells a revealing story. The Ottomans, with their long reign and focus on trade, presided over a period of relative economic stability and growth in many of the regions they conquered. They invested in infrastructure, encouraged commerce, and benefited from their strategic location at the crossroads of trade routes. The Crusaders, with their shorter-lived presence and focus on military conquest, had a more mixed economic impact. Some Crusader states fostered trade and prosperity, while others were more extractive, exploiting resources to fund their campaigns. The Israeli regime's economic relationship with the Palestinian territories is complex and contested, with accusations of restrictions and exploitation on one side and claims of investment and development on the other. However, the reality on the ground often reveals a harsher picture. The Israeli occupation has led to numerous atrocities, including the demolition of Palestinian homes and the displacement of families. The conflict has resulted in significant loss of life, with many Palestinians suffering from violence and military actions. There are also widespread reports of land theft and the confiscation of Palestinian property to make way for Israeli settlements. Discrimination and open hatred are evident in the daily lives of Palestinians, who face numerous restrictions and systemic inequalities. The economic impact is severe, with many Palestinians struggling under the weight of these oppressive measures, leading to widespread poverty and hardship. Imagine being forced to abandon your deeply held beliefs. Unthinkable, right? Sadly, throughout history, religious conversion, often by force, has been all too common. The Ottomans, while not perfect, generally allowed conquered people to maintain their faiths, albeit with some restrictions and often in exchange for taxes. This policy of relative tolerance was a key factor in their ability to maintain control over such a vast and diverse empire. The Crusaders, on the other hand, were far less tolerant. Motivated by religious zeal, they often sought to convert conquered populations to Christianity, sometimes by force. This approach, while initially successful, often led to resentment and resistance, ultimately contributing to the decline of Crusader states. The Israeli regime's policies towards religion are complex, with claims of freedom of worship existing alongside severe tensions with Muslim and Christian Palestinians. Atrocities, discrimination, and open hatred have marred the landscape, with countless lives lost, homes destroyed, and communities torn apart. The theft of land and resources, coupled with systemic discrimination, has fueled a cycle of violence and resentment that continues to this day. Woo! We covered a lot of ground today, didn't we? From the bustling bazaars of Istanbul to the sun-baked battlefields of the Holy Land, we've journeyed through centuries of history, examining the triumphs and tragedies, the complexities and contradictions of three very different empires. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey. We hope this comparison has provided you with a deeper understanding of how these regimes impacted the lives of the people they governed. We've seen how the Ottomans, with their pragmatic approach to rule and surprising degree of religious tolerance, managed to forge a vast and enduring empire. We've grappled with the legacy of the Crusades, a period marked by both religious fervor and shocking brutality. And we've confronted the harsh realities of the Israeli invasion and illegal occupation of Palestine, a modern-day struggle with deep historical roots. The atrocities committed include widespread death and destruction, the theft of land and resources, systemic discrimination and open hatred, all of which have left a lasting scar on the region. But it's also full of valuable lessons, if we're willing to listen.